Taking a break from drilling for oil and gas on federal lands. That's President Biden's executive order. We're going to explore that on this episode of Right Angle with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. And gentlemen, the president is not repealing existing federal leases to private companies who are drilling on federal land, but basically saying they're not going to issue any more new leases. I did a little bit of research and found that among the sort of onshore drilling that goes on, only about 9% of what the oil companies are doing onshore is on federal lands, and they're more concerned about the future access than they are about the current situation. But everybody knew that Joe Biden was going to do what he could to advance climate change legislation, to be able to put in place executive orders, for example, getting the United States back into the Paris Climate Accords, shutting down the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, stopping the process of leasing federal lands in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. All of this is stuff that now the Biden administration is in process of doing. But Stephen Green, one of the things that fascinates me about this whole thing is the fact that the president of the United States has anything to say about where oil can be drilled. And what I found was that the federal government owns some 640 million acres of land in the United States, about 28% of the land in the United States, the vast majority of that in western states, and particularly places like Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Alaska. Steve, do you think that that's where we really started to have our problem, when what was masquerading as the federal government protecting lands became essentially somebody in Washington is the deed holder for more than a quarter of our country?
Yeah, the advantage of having all those little tiny eastern seaboard states having established themselves as states before there was a federal government is they owned all their own stuff. As we pushed west, the Fed said, we're buying Louisiana, it's ours, and kind of doled it out as needed. And then you get to the western states, it took that from Mexico. And again, the Fed said, this is ours. We'll give some of it back to you, maybe, if you're good. And it's un-American for the government to own that much stuff. It just sucks. That said, they do own it. And that means because, Congress is increasingly wussy and has been for about 100 years now and getting worse. Congress abdicates its responsibility. You ask an American, do you think we should you think we should be able to drill on these lands, assuming all the environmental regulations and so forth are followed? And most Americans will say, oh, yeah, that sounds great. I don't like paying a whole lot for gas. And, don't despoil the land. It's perfect. I love it. So you would take that attitude to the House of Representatives, where they would do the popular thing and open this stuff up, except Congress doesn't want to do it because it's the loud, angry people, the squeaky wheels, that get the attention, not some nice person who just doesn't want to spend $5, $6, $7 for a gallon of gasoline. That said, I've come up with a solution that solves almost all of our problems. We're going to sell off all those federal lands to the Chinese. We're going to take all of our dollars back. Then, this is the beautiful part, we're going to engineer a real estate collapse. So they're left with a bunch of debt. They've got to sell that land back to hardworking Americans for pennies on the dollar. Debt's eliminated. We own all our stuff. We give Beijing the finger with one hand. We give Washington the finger with the other hand. Win, 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 win.
See, that's what our viewers like about Stephen Green. He's a big picture guy. Big
I
ideas.
like the cut of your jib.
That's right. Bill Whittle, one of the concerns about the oil industry was that the Biden administration didn't really consult with them on what they plan to do with this executive order. It can't help but look to me, though, Bill, like saying we're going to suspend new leases on federal land, given the relatively small amount of federal land that's involved right now, is more of a pose designed to placate the hard left within Joe Biden's coalition. And it's really not going to cause that much of a problem for anybody. Do you think this is something that that Republicans should get all lathered up about, or should we not take the bait and basically say, okay, well, have your 4 years, we'll take care of it with another executive order when we get back?
No, I think this is another Irish Spring moment for all of us to lather ourselves as much as possible, because there's an awful lot wrong with this. I agree with what both you said about the federal government owning land. And I'd just like to put on the record right now that whatever federal land is available in Idaho, I will buy all of it for $2,000 cash on the barrelhead, no questions asked. And it's just clear profit to you or to whoever you decide to give it to. The problem with oil, unfortunately, is oil is not evenly distributed across the globe. If oil was evenly distributed across the globe, then you could say that 17% of federal land, 70% of the United States is owned by federal land, whatever. If oil was evenly distributed, then you'd be saying, well, that's only 17% of the oil that is off limits, but it doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, it kind of works the opposite way. Privately owned land is being drilled for oil, and to some degree, those oil reserves are being emptied. And so when you say that there's a percentage of the federal land that's available for oil drilling, and it's not really that big, it may in fact be huge, because that may be where most of the oil is. So yeah, this has got a problem. And this whole thing is it's so irrational from top to bottom. If the planet were getting dirtier, I'd have a different opinion about this. If America was getting dirtier, let me say. But this country's been getting cleaner since I was 12, been cleaner every year. And when people talk about, well, we can't be drilling for oil in Alaska, the only things that I've seen about the oil pipeline in Alaska are giant herds of elks and caribou huddling close to the pipeline with their young because it keeps them warm. Now, if you were to ask people on the street, would you be in favor of installing a warming system for baby caribous who are freezing in the Arctic reserves, I bet you could pass that legislation. I bet you could. And that's the actual result. And so none of this has any bearing to reality whatsoever. And as far as the reason behind it, the global warming people lost the argument when they stopped calling it global warming. When it stopped being about something abnormal. The climate's been changing forever. So the whole thing is just giant kabuki all the way down, Scott. There's nothing here makes any sense. None of it. If it turned out that this was a crisis that was a real crisis and a measurable crisis, then I would be certainly willing to look at it differently. If somebody told me that drilling oil wells was going to bring the sweet meteor of death closer, and we could prevent extinction by doing this, then I'd be all in favor of doing it. But nothing, much like the COVID thing in the exact same way, none of it has anything to do with, forget with science, none of it has anything to do with reason, none of it has anything to do with common sense, none of it is quantifiable, none of it is measurable. It's not a question of moving the goalposts. There are no goalposts. And this is why this is just essentially kind of a political posturing scam designed to get people into public office. This is what he thinks he could sell. He sold it. And now people are going to have to pay. And the people who are going to have to pay are going to be the poor people. They're the ones who cannot afford these raises in costs of electricity because of these limitations. They don't care about that. All they care about is saying, we're here to save the planet. Because, when you really think about it, if you are infected with delusions of grandeur, then you're going to have to travel some distance before you can beat saving the planet.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this may sound like a defeatist attitude. It is far from it. I think if you're shrewd politically, you look at the situation that you're in at the current moment with cold-eyed rationalism and say, do we have the power to stop anything like this? That if we want to stop it, do we have the power to stop it? If we lack the power to stop it, and raising a big stink about it would just be so that we could crow at the next election, every congressman could go home and said, I fought against Joe Biden's trying to kill the oil industry in the United States, but really with no impact, then I think both sides are engaged in a show. The president may be there there for 4 years. He may be there for 8 years. But in any case, it's an executive order. As we've learned in the past week, executive orders signed by one president can be repealed by the next president. And in the business of the oil industry and most businesses, there is a relatively lengthy timeline for getting in place plans to open up new oil fields and things like that. It may seem like it's some sort of tragic move to some in the oil industry right now, but they all know that they'll be fine 4 years or 8 years from now, whenever the next chance they get to start getting leases in these federal lands again. And they're not as panicked as they look. My suggestion to Republicans is don't take the bait, is don't get all fired up about this just so you can seem like you're constantly negative and fired up about everything. If there's something that if there's a battle you can win, go after that. But if you're just wanting to put on a show about how opposed you are to something that the president did by executive order, you're wasting everybody's time. It's when I was a county commissioner, there was one of my colleagues got really upset that the county executive chose as his chief administrator somebody who was a hard left Democrat, and he said, "Well, this is be really bad to have this guy." And I said, "Look, the county executive is entitled to his pick. And I disagree with this guy. I think he's a bad choice, but the county executive got elected for 4 years, and he is entitled to his cabinet, so to speak." By the same token, if a president is doing a legally, allowable, constitutionally allowable executive order, he's entitled to do that. I don't think it's a good idea, but I also don't think it's a good idea to wear yourself out trying to fight on land that you will never be able to capture. Focus on the things that you can win in the short time when you're out of power, so that when you're back in power, people will trust that you're not just a negative defeatist who is angry at your opponent, but somebody who really has the best interest of the country at heart. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.